Hey everybody, it's Amy with A Farmish Kind of Life. I've had a lot of requests to make a video for how to make bread. So I'm going to show you how to make the simple recipe for country crusty round loaf that I make almost every day at my home. We're going to show you how to do that. It's not too tough. Now I want to be completely honest. I'm not a fancy bread baker. I just bake bread and then we eat it. I live in a house of men, so what I do isn't fancy and I might not follow all the rules, but it's how I've been baking bread for almost 20 years and it works, so hopefully it will help you too. This recipe is going to give you 4 round loaves. The original recipe will give you 2, but I always double it because it doesn't last very long. If you don't need 4 loaves, cut the recipe in half, but not any of the times, and then you'll have 2 loaves. But make 4 because it's delicious. So the first thing that we need is 3 cups of lukewarm water. So I'll do 2 cups and then 1 cup. We're gonna put this in a big old bowl. Next we're gonna add some yeast. This is the yeast that I get. You buy it in bulk. I get it on Amazon when it's available. Much cheaper than buying the little packets in the store, but if you have the packets in the store, that works too. So if you use the packets from the store, you're gonna use 2 packets for this recipe. Otherwise, you're gonna use 5 teaspoons of bulk. This I just pulled out of the freezer to show you. You can freeze this yeast. So I usually buy 4 of these at a time and then stick what I'm not using in the freezer. I thaw 1 of the pounds and stick it in the fridge in a container like this and then just use it every day. So 5 teaspoons of this. You're gonna sprinkle it in here into your warm water. And the water shouldn't be super hot. You should be able to hold your finger in it. But it shouldn't be super cold either. Depends who you ask. Now I haven't been counting, you guys. I haven't counted how much is in there. How much did I put in there? I don't know. We'll throw another one in for good measure and then I can laugh when I watch and see how much yeast I put in there. It's to show you, I'm not fancy and I don't follow the rules. So back to the temperature, some people will say like 100 degrees is good. I usually just get it as hot as I can get out of the tap. I should be looking at the camera. If the water is too hot, it's gonna like fry your yeasties and they're not gonna do anything. And if the water is too cold, your yeast isn't going to do anything. So we are gonna stir this up a little bit and then we are gonna let it sit for 5-8 minutes. It needs to get bubbly and foamy so you know that it's working and it's gonna do its thing, and then we'll come back and do some more with this bread. While I'm waiting for the yeast to do its thing and get all bubbly, I also turn on my oven to preheat to 170. That's not because we're gonna bake the bread at 170, it's because I like to get my oven nice and warm so my bread has a place to rise. Our house is pretty chilly, and so if we just let it rise on the counter, it takes a long time. And so I usually set my oven to 170, which is the lowest temperature it can go to. Get it to 170 and then turn it off and then leave that heat kind of in the oven. And then that's where I let my bread raise. The other thing that I do while I'm waiting is I grease a large bowl. So in here, because we use lard to grease, and so I have my lard in here kind of warming up a little bit so then I can get that rubbed around in there to grease the bowl. So when I put the dough in there to raise, then it won't stick to the bowl. All right, we have let this sit for a little bit. It's getting foamy here. So now we are going to add 2 tablespoons of sugar and 3 teaspoons of salt. Stir that up in there a little bit. Sometimes your yeast won't get super foamy. Don't worry about that. If you have really fresh yeast, it'll get nice and foamy, and you know, if you have the right perfect temperature of water, and it's just this great science thing, it'll get really good and foamy in here. But if it doesn't get super foamy, don't worry about it. Still continue with your recipe, because there have been times where I'm like, it doesn't even look like my yeast is doing anything, and I just continue with the recipe because I'm like, well, why not? And it still turns out. So don't let that be too huge of a deterrent for you, because like right now, I'll show you, this doesn't look very foamy at all. I mean, I've stirred it a little bit, but it's not as foamy as it might be other times, but I guarantee you it's still gonna turn out. Now it's time to add all the flour. I keep my flour, I buy my flour in bulk. I keep it in the corner of my kitchen in a 5-gallon bucket. Right in there. So the recipe says that this bread will take 8 cups of flour. The thing you need to know about flour and bread is it's kind of a suggestion. It's not a hard, fast rule. It has a lot to do with the weather. It has a lot to do with a lot of things. If you are baking on a really rainy day or a day where there's a lot of moisture in the air when it's really humid, you're gonna use way more flour in your recipe than you would if it's a drier day. It's science. So know that if you're trying to make a bread recipe and you're like, this isn't turning out, the flour part of it can be really, really different. So all these secrets you pick up when you've been baking bread for a while. With the flour, add a couple cups at a time and then stir. You're gonna use your muscles doing this. Don't give up. So we've added 6 cups so far, and it's to the point now that it's getting really hard to stir. So this is when it's time to start kneading. So kneading, you're gonna sprinkle some flour on your surface here. You're gonna pour your dough out, and then you're gonna start working it with your hands while you work in a little bit more flour. I should tell you, before you start kneading, you want to take off your Fitbit, any jewelry you have, any stabby rings you have, because this will get everywhere, especially if it's still a little bit sticky, so you want to take care of that stuff. So now to knead, we're just going to continue to add little bits of flour and work it in. And when you start working it in, you don't want to go in with your fingertips because you're going to get it stuck everywhere. You really want to use more the heels of your hand to do your kneading. When it starts to get sticky to your hands, that means it's time to add more flour. So how do you know when you're done kneading? When it's not sticking to your hands anymore, that's a really good indication that you're done kneading. Kneading usually takes a lot longer than people think it takes. It can take 5 to 8 minutes to knead this into actual bread dough that's going to work. So what I like to do is just stick my earbuds in and listen to a couple songs, and then I know that it's good. And if you'll notice, the closer this gets to being done, the less flour I'm adding. I'm not just dumping like a whole cup of flour on. You want to just sprinkle them, and it takes a while. Little bit knead, little bit knead, little bit knead. Now I got some bread dough I can do something with. So my lard is softening up, so I can spread that around in my bowl, get that all greased up in there. We're gonna put the bread dough in here, and then we're going to cover it with a clean dish towel, like a flour sack towel. We're gonna stick it in that oven. We're gonna let it raise for 1 hour. Now you can go drink some coffee while you wait. It's been an hour. It's time to take the dough out of the oven and see how much it rose. Here we go. Let's see, it's good and warm. There we go. See how much that rose? So now what we're gonna do is actually punch it down like that so it stops rising. Do that a little bit. We're gonna set that aside. We're going to start the oven at 400 degrees. I usually make this bread on a jelly roll pan because it's big enough for 4 loaves. If you don't have a jelly roll pan, you can probably make this into 9x13s. Just use what you have. You actually don't even need anything that has sides. You could just do it on a cookie sheet if you wanted to. This lard has been softening up on here, so now I can spread it around. You do want what you're going to bake your bread on to be greased. Everybody always wonders how to shape the loaves. It's not difficult. It's actually kind of just like making a giant bun. So I'll show you what I do. Again, I'm not fancy. So we want this to make 4 loaves of bread. So I reach in here and I basically cut it in half, or about half. Okay. And then I cut that half in half. Okay. So I've got this loaf of bread, or this lump of dough, and I just kind of fold it in on itself a few times till you have this nice ball of dough like that. That's gonna be my loaf of bread. It doesn't look big enough yet, does it? But it's going to rise again while it's baking. I'm gonna put all these on my my pan here. Make another loaf here. Got a little bit of dough sticking. Here we go. There's another one. Got this other big blob in here. Sort of kind of cut it in half. Again, I'm not fancy, not super particular. Got that. And the last ball of dough. Now there are a couple things that you can do here. You can cut an X in the top, you don't have to. You can also do an egg wash, which is like crack an egg, put one egg in a little cup and put a little bit of water with it, whisk it up, and then brush it over the bread dough. What that's gonna do is give it a shiny crust. That's all it's going to do. So if you're trying to conserve eggs or you just don't want to do the extra step, you don't have to do that at all. You don't need an egg wash on this bread, and usually I don't because it's just an extra step and I need to save my eggs. When the oven's preheated, we're gonna go ahead and put them in the oven at 400 for 40 minutes. It's ready. Look at that. Ooh, these two are touching. That's what happens when you leave bread alone in the oven unattended. Sometimes they get too close. Now the hardest thing for you to do is gonna be to wait to eat those. But here's the thing, don't cut into fresh bread right away because you'll wreck it. Let it cool off for a little bit. I usually leave it on this pan for a little bit and then I move it to a cooling rack and I let it sit there. Usually you should let it sit for at least an hour. I know it's really, really hard because especially if this is the first time you have baked bread, you're gonna be like, oh my gosh, I have to eat it. But you gotta wait. So these are perfect for slicing into sandwiches. They're perfect for toast. The other really cool thing that you can do if you wanna level up is you can make that recipe that I explained to you, and then you can make 6 loaves instead of 4, and you can actually bake these and make them bread bowls. So do this, hollow out the center, fill it with soup, whatever. So good. If you want the printable recipe, you can look in the description. I will link it down there. It's at my website. Otherwise, look at you, you're baking bread now. Think of all the things you can do. If you haven't subscribed to my channel, go ahead and do that. Click the little notification bell, the dingy bell, Amy, that's what you call it. Click the dingy bell so you'll know when I put out new videos. Have a great day. Keep baking.